Now, these stresses can arise from people's daily responsibilities and routines, and including work, family, and finances. But potential stresses, they can come in many shapes and sizes.
डॉक्टर साहब, मैं ये जानना
Like,
चाहता था कि आपने आर्मी कब ज्वाइन किया और कब छोड़ा, और मेडिकोज के लिए ऊपर तक जाने में इंजीनियर्स तो पेनिट्रेट कर जा पा रहे हैं, मेडिकोज नहीं ऊपर जा पाते हैं, तो कैसा लगता है इसमें?
हाँ जी, फ्रस्ट्रेशन तो होता ही है, बट ऐसा है कि आई ज्वाइंड इन 81.
81?
I joined the army in 81
ओके
and retired in 2012.
ओके ओके।
अब ऐसा है ना कि हमारी जो एएमसी है, आर्मी मेडिकल कोर,
जी।
it is bigger than एयर फोर्स एंड नेवी कंबाइंड टुगेदर. इतनी बड़ी है हमारी.
ओके।
तो हमारे यहाँ पे प्रमोशंस भी इसलिए धीरे धीरे होते हैं.
ये गलत है।
तो अब जो है हम
मुझे लगता
नहीं.
है प्रमोशंस
हाँ
में वैरायटी होनी चाहिए, प्रमोशंस क्विक होने चाहिए, तभी तो मोटिवेशन मिलता है।
हाँ हाँ, रिक्वायर्ड राइट. वही प्रॉब्लम है, क्योंकि वो चाहते हैं ना कि देयर इज अ डिफरेंट कंसेप्ट. वो कहते हैं कि जो फाइटिंग आर्म्स हैं उनमें यंग ब्लड चाहिए. अगर उनका कमांडिंग ऑफिसर ही जो बॉस है ना, ही शुड बी ऑफ अ यंगर एज. सो दैट्स व्हाई उनके यहाँ पे बड़ी जल्दी जल्दी प्रमोशंस होते हैं.
अरे डॉक्टर साहब, आप लोग भी तो फ्रंट पे घायलों के लिए अपनी जान को हथेली में रख के फ्रंट पे रहना पड़ता है, ऐसा नहीं है। और मुझे ही लगता है
हाँ जी.
anybody can be a good leader. He can be an engineer also, he can be a medical also, he can be NDA और आज की सभा में हम चर्चा करने जा रहे हैं स्ट्रेस इंड्यूस्ड ह्यूमन रिएक्शंस। डॉक्टर साहब, मेरे विचार से ये विषय बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग भी है, कठिन भी है, और मुझे लगता है कि जो लोग असफल होते हैं उनके
हाँ जी.
लिए तो बहुत ही घातक है, क्योंकि स्ट्रेस की वजह से वो और गड्ढे में चले जाते हैं और असफलता को पाते हैं। और जो सफलता की चरम पे पहुंचते हैं, पीक पे, और उनको अगर स्ट्रेस हो जाती है तो वो राजा से रंक बन जाते हैं। तो डॉक्टर साहब, आप तो विशेषज्ञ हैं इस फील्ड के, तो इस बारे में हमारे दर्शकों को बताएं, जिससे कि हर आदमी राइज करे और कभी भी डिप्रेशन को फेस ना करना पड़े। थैंक यू डॉक्टर कर्नवाल, यू आर मोस्ट वेलकम, तो प्लीज गो अहेड।
Sure. हाँ. वंदे मातरम. जय हिंद.
जय श्री राम।
नमस्कार. और गुड इवनिंग टू ऑल द व्यूअर्स एंड पार्टिसिपेंट्स ऑफ दिस वीडियो. आई एम श्योर अभी चूंकि इस समय कोल्ड वेव सब जगह है, यू मस्ट ऑल बी स्ट्रेस्ड आउट ड्यू टू द कोल्ड वेव. सो I need not tell you much about the how you are feeling about this at this moment. But the cold wave has. Sorry, we are talking of the mental stress. See, the mental stress has been there right from the evolution of human beings, and it has gradually increased to such proportions now it's become a what you call as global concern. So it's a global challenge, as I've put it. So आप लोगों ने तो देखा होगा कि आपको तो सिर्फ इतना याद है कि जब भी आपको कोई स्ट्रेस आता है तो आप कैसा फील करते हैं, बॉडी में क्या फील होता है. इसके अलावा कभी आपने नहीं सोचा होगा कि बॉडी के अंदर एक्चुअली क्या होता है, माइंड के अंदर क्या होता है, और भी कितने सारे फिजियोलॉजिकल चेंजेस होते हैं, लाइक हार्मोनल चेंजेस. सो वी आर गोइंग टू डिस्कस the challenges which take place or the reactions which take place in the body and in the mind. So this is what my basic aim is. So stress, it's also known as physiological stress, and It describes what people experience when they are under mental, physical, and emotional pressure caused by a difficult situation. Now, this difficult situation is known as a stressor, which simply means anything that gives you stress is called stressor. So, stress is a natural human response that prompts us to address challenges and threats in our lives, basically. So, everybody experiences threat to some degree. So, let us discuss about the prevalence of stress. There are three national surveys which have been carried out in our country. They have demonstrated that higher stress has been found in women than in men. Second important point is that unemployed individuals, they reported higher levels of stress. And all those who with less education and income. And third is retired person. They have reported the lowest levels of stress. So regarding the prevalence in India, we have seen the highest number of stress cases was in post-COVID pandemic, during COVID pandemic, and after that, the overall prevalence was 74.1%. And you can imagine what happened in youth. The incidence was as high as 87%. There's another condition which is, is a matter of concern nowadays, especially amongst our young youth and adolescents, is called fear of missing out. I'm going to discuss this later on. But it was seen that the prevalence of stress in males was 59.2%, while in females it was 40.08%, due to fear of missing out. Next comes current work situation. The prevalence was found to be 26%. And it was found that 17% had stress in the financial instability conditions. 14% stress was seen in relationship troubles. So we have, as a natural human being, we think so stress is always bad. No, there's something like good stress also. So not all stresses are harmful. So at times, stress may be of some benefit. So it is called good stress. In technical terms, we call it as eustress. It's a good kind of stress which is associated with positive feelings, optimal health, and performance. And stress can motivate us to study for the exams, to visit the doctor regularly. Say, for example, a person is a diabetic and is worried about his health. So he'll make sure that he remains symptom-free as long as possible and he can live as long as possible. So he'll make sure that he goes to the doctor regularly. Sure enough, there is a stress over him due to the diabetic condition. So exercise, yes, of course, and perform to the best of our ability at work. This is rather good stress. Say a moderate amount of stress can also benefit in challenging situations. For example, say athletes may be motivated and energized just before the game starts because the stress levels are very high just before the game begins. Other example is like students may experience similar beneficial stress just before a major examination, say a competition. Now this chart The graph shows the level of stress as compared to the performance level. So what happens to the performance level as the stress changes? So as you can see, as stress increases, so do the performance and general well-being. This is known as eustress. When the stress reaches, I think the pointer is not working. So when the stress, reaches an optimal level, that is the highest point of the curve, the performance reaches its peak. A person at this stress level is at the highest peak of his performance, meaning that he feels fully energized, is fully focused, and he can work with minimal effort and maximal efficiency. So when this stress exceeds this optimal level, that is the tip, the peak of this curve, so it becomes excessive and debilitating. That is, it is no longer a positive force. So people who reach this level of stress, they feel burnt out. They are fatigued, exhausted, and the performance begins to decline. And if the stress continues to remain excessive, health may begin to erode as well. So what are the various types of stress-induced reactions? Stress-induced reactions we are talking about. So primarily, I'll call it as hormonal reactions. Number two, the reactions that take place in the body, which is known as physiological or physical response. And third is, what are the reactions which take place? The thought process which takes place in the mind. So hormonal responses, responses in the body, and responses in the mind. So physiological response is of two types. The first one is the fight or flight response, which is very sketchy. And it primarily deals with hormonal changes. So it doesn't give us a clear picture of stress. So it was further elaborated, and the name given to the modified version was General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS in short. So, but this General Adaptation Syndrome only concentrated on the physical responses. So the third thing that came up is the psychological response. So psychological response, as I've already said, is what goes on in the mind when you face a threat. So we are going to discuss each one by one. So let us come to the fight or flight response. See, fight or flight response, it's a built-in mechanism that helps in maintaining homeostasis. Now, what is homeostasis? Homeostasis is an internal environment in which physiological parameters, such as blood pressure, respiration, digestion, and temperature are stabilized at levels optimal for survival. Let me give you an example. Take an example of a voltage stabilizer. So the voltage stabilizer protects all your gadgets, say within 190 volts to 250 volts. So that is the homeostasis of the voltage stabilizer. Minor changes will keep on taking place depending on the fluctuation of voltage, but overall, there won't be any harm. So this is one of the examples which I've given you. Then Further, the fight or flight response is adaptive because it enables us to adjust internally and externally to changes in our surroundings. And this adaptation is helpful in species survival. So, when does fight or flight response occur? It occurs when a person experiences very strong emotions, especially those associated with a perceived threat. So let's take, for example, that you're going for a walk in the evening. You're enjoying your walk, admiring the nature. The road is lonely. There's nobody on the road. And while walking, all of a sudden, you see a leopard, emerging from a bush or from behind the tree. So you get a shock. This is an extreme stress, we can call it. So what will you do? You will start thinking, oh, first of all, the mind becomes numb, the body becomes stunned, and you do not know how to react. Your mind is blank. But then the body starts recovering from that momentary, paralysis. So the moment you come across such a severe threat, there are two processes which get activated simultaneously. First is increased production of adrenaline and increased production of steroids. So because of adrenaline and steroids, the body becomes absolutely aroused and alert. So because of the increased adrenaline, see, pupils begin to dilate, heart starts pounding, heart rate increases. One begins to breathe heavily. He starts sweating. He gets butterflies in his stomach and his muscles become tense. And these are due to the increased levels of adrenaline which have taken place. There's increased production of steroids. Now, these steroids are also known as stress hormones. So these stress hormones, they help us provide a boost of energy when we first encounter a stressor, preparing us to either run away or fight with the stress. But please remember this stress, talking of steroids. These steroids are basically immunosuppressives. They suppress your immune system. So if there's a persistent stress, your immune system is going to be suppressed and you will face a lot of problems subsequently. So this is, again, what I just told you, that you have a pair of adrenal glands just above the upper poles of the kidneys. They release adrenaline and steroids in response to acute stress. And this diagram depicts the effects of adrenaline, what I've already discussed, like dilatation of pupils, increase in the heart rate, muscles and become tense and may even tremble. Respiration quickens, you start breathing heavily and start sweating profusely. So next, so as I said, that fight or flight response was primarily a manifestation of hormonal response in the body. Now, general adaptation syndrome deals exclusively with the body's response. Okay? So what happens in the body's response? See, the body's natural balance is called homeostasis, which I've already discussed. So within the homeostasis, the body gets used to those minor stresses. Every day you come across minor stresses, but the body doesn't get upset. You don't get upset. You take it as a part of life. Say, for example, you are having a cup of tea, and due to some reason, the cup falls down. It's just a momentary stress, and you can overcome it easily. So, within homeostasis, the body adapts to minor stresses. But when the stress disrupts your homeostasis, then your behavioral and physiological reactions become odd. So, if you say this is general adaptation syndrome, it has 3 stages. The first stage is alarm reaction. The second one is stage of resistance. And if the stress persists, then you enter the stage of exhaustion. So let us see what alarm reaction is. So this is a flow chart which simply gives you a quick, what you call as a broad line as to what happens. So whenever a stress exceeds the amount of adaptation given in homeostasis, the body goes into the alarm reaction. So the first phase of the alarm reaction, the first thing that happens is that your fight or flight response gets suppressed. As I said, the first state is you're in a shock. You do not know what is happening. You do not know what is to do. You can't think or you can't act. You suddenly get paralyzed. Your mind gets paralyzed. Your body gets paralyzed. Then subsequently, this fight or flight reaction starts occurring, and this is known as anti-shock phase. So this fight or flight reaction occurs in an attempt to best mobilize the body's resources in case of danger. Now, if the exposure to stress is prolonged, then the body enters the phase of resistance. And if still the exposure to stressor continues, then the body, enters the state of exhaustion. So what is alarm reaction? Let us discuss it slightly more detail. So it describes the body's immediate reaction upon facing a threatening situation. And during an alarm reaction, you are alerted by the stressor, and a series of physiological reactions in your body take place that provide you with this energy to manage the situation. Say, for example, a person who wakes up in the middle of the night to discover his house is on fire. This is an example that he is experiencing an alarm reaction. So if the exposure to a stressor is prolonged, then the body enters the stage of resistance. That is, the initial shock of alarm reaction has worn off, and the body adapts to the stressor. But at the same time, the body also remains alert and is prepared to respond to the stress, although with less intensity. This is due to the body's adaptation to the stress. Say, for example, suppose a child who went missing is still missing 72 hours later. Although the parents would obviously remain extremely disturbed, but the magnitude of reactions would have diminished due to some adaptation in the event. So in the first 72 hours, the parents are desperate, they are panicky, they'll go to all the police stations to find out whether he has been arrested or there's been a case of accident, or they'll go to the hospitals, they will call up friends, the boys' friends, to whether he is there, or they may have the fear that he has been kidnapped. But by and large, when they do not get any negative response from either of these places, the mind, has a hope that the child is still alive and probably he is in good health. So at this stage of exhaustion, the person is absolutely fatigued. He is no longer able to adapt to the stressor. So the body loses its ability to resist as physical wear takes its toll on the body's tissues and organs. Now, just because of these constant stress and the the toll on the body's tissues and organs may lead to illness, disease, other permanent damages to the body, such as serious health problems, hypertension, heart disease. Coming back to the same earlier example that I'd given, say if a missing child still remained missing after 3 months. In these 3 months, the parents must have done everything possible to trace the child. So the long-term stress associated with this situation may cause the parents to totally exhausted at some point, or even develop a serious and irreversible illness. Even death may occur because of the shock. The person may have a heart attack. One of the parents may have a heart attack, and he may even die. But and also at the same time, because of the stress, his blood pressure shoots up and develops blood pressure, high blood pressure. So this graph depicts the general adaptation syndrome. This is the summary of the general adaptation syndrome. On one side is the time, the vertical axis shows the stress resistance. So when a person comes across stress, the immediate reaction is there's a drop in the resistance level to the stress. Once he comes out and goes into the anti-shock phase, that's the time when his resistance starts increasing. So over a period of time, as you have discussed, he will go through the resistance stage. But once he crosses that limit, then he gives up, his body is exhausted, and the resistance goes down dramatically. So what are the effects of stresses on the body? And, we can summarize it. That first is the initial jolt, followed by a subsequent readjustment and a later depletion of all physical resources, which ultimately leads to serious health problems. Now the psychological reactions to stress, what we have been discussing. How does the mind act? So how does individual perceive and then appraises, that is, judges the stress? Whether he judges the stressor as a threat or a challenge. So these are the two kinds of appraisals, judgments. The first judgment that comes to the person's mind is known as primary appraisal. Subsequently, good senses prevail upon him, and then he goes in for a secondary appraisal. That is, he analyzes the judgment that he has come across to. So these appraisals, in turn, influence our reactions to such events. So primary appraisal. So how then individual appraises or judges the degree of potential harm or threat to well-being that a stressor may cause. So the person can the stressor may likely be appraised or judged as either a threat or a challenge. Threat is when the person feels that it could lead to some kind of harm, loss, or other negative consequences. And a challenge, if on the other hand, the person feels and perceives it as not as a threat but as a challenge, if he believes that it carries the potential for gain or personal growth. So let us give an example of threat. When the person perceives the stressor as a threat, grave threat. For example, there are two employees who were promoted to a leadership position, would likely to perceive in a different manner. They will view it in a different manner. One may think, oh, the promotion is a much greater stress because it will lead to excessive workload demands, increased working hours, and I'll not be able to give time to my family or, attend the social circles also. While the other person who was also been promoted in a different department, his colleague, he will see it as an opportunity to gain new skills and grow professionally. So we can simply say, broadly say, that the first person took it as a threat, the second judged it as an opportunity. That, in other words, he took it as a challenge, the second person took it as a challenge. So this is the differences, different type of primary appraisals one person can have, whether it's a positive person, positive-minded person, or a pessimist person. Now, what is a secondary appraisal? If the individuals interpret the stress as a threat, it triggers secondary appraisal. Now, then the person starts, analyzing. He judges the options available to cope with a stressor, and he perceives how effective these options will be. So everything depends on the individual's belief in his ability to complete a task is very important. And a threat tends to be viewed as less catastrophic if one believes that something can be done about it. This is a flow chart of the same general adaptation syndrome. You come across a stressor. So there's a primary appraisal, whether it's a challenge or a threat. If the person considers it as a challenge, he will see into it the potential for gain or growth. But if the person perceives as a threat that may lead to harm, loss, or negative consequences, then he'll again go in for secondary appraisal. He will see what are the potential options available and how effective they are going to be. If he considers that the options are going to be effective, he will develop less of stress. But if the person thinks that the options are very few or they're not going to be effective, then he'll develop greater stress. Say, for example, I'm giving an example, another one. There are two middle-aged gentlemen. One is Mr. Amit, the second one is Mr. Sanjay. Both develop chest pain. So you can imagine what I've just said. So although both men view the chest pain as a potential threat, that is the first judgment that they come across to, but their secondary appraisals can differ considerably. It depends on the person's, nature, whether he's a pessimist or he's an optimist. So in considering the chest pain, some of the thoughts racing through Amit's mind will be, oh, God, it can be a heart attack. What if it is serious and I can't even recover? What if I die? What will happen to my family? What if I do survive, but I have to undergo angioplasty or bypass surgery? I've heard that experience is awful. What if I have to quit my job? My wife and I won't have enough money to pay the hospital bill or bank loans. Oh, this is terrible and I can't deal with it. This is the way Amit, you know, judges the condition, the stress, the consequences of stress. On the other hand, Sanjay thinks, okay, this may not be good. Although most of the times it turns out to be a pain due to different cause of the chest. So I need to have it checked out. If it turns out to be heart disease, there are doctors who are available who can take care of it because the medical technology today is quite advanced. And I'll have a lot of different options and I'll just be fine. So you can see how they have judged it in a different manner. Oh, so clearly, Amit and Sanjay have different outlooks on what might turn out to be a very serious situation. Amit seems to think that little could be done about it, whereas Sanjay believes that worst case scenario, a number of options that are likely to be effective would be available. So as such, Amit would clearly experience greater stress than would Sanjay. So what are stressors? Very simple. Any factor that causes stress is known as stressors.